As we said, with more from the Ames Institute, we have Dr. Leanna Standish. She is a neuroscientist and physician living in Seattle, and she is a co-founder of the Ames Institute, as well as the Sacred Medicines Public Benefit Corporation. Her brain research is focused on the use of functional MRI imaging of the human brain to investigate consciousness, which is fascinating work. And her medical practice focuses on integrative oncology care and clinical research. In addition, in 2003, she became the steward of a Hawaiian ethnobotanical rainforest preserve created by Kathleen Harrison, Dennis McKenna, Luis Eduardo Luna, and Terrace McKenna in the 1980s. And so now we're pleased to hear from Dr. Leanna Standish.
I am so happy to be on this panel. My fascination with ayahuasca began in 1999 when I was investigating brain correlates of human consciousness. I've been using fMRI technology at the University of Washington. As a brain scientist, I've always been fascinated by the mind-body problem, the nature and origin of consciousness. My end goal has been to be able to study the transpersonal effects of ayahuasca using real-time brain imaging methods. My other end goal was to make ayahuasca therapy more available to my patients, and especially to my mother, who committed suicide several years before my first ayahuasca ceremony. If only I could have shown her ayahuasca in the depth of her depression. In 2003, I became steward of an ethnobotanical preserve in Hawaii, where Banisteriopsis copii and Psychotria viridis thrive, the two plants that are commonly used to make ayahuasca tea. It was then that I began lab research to measure dimethyltryptamine and harmful alkaloids in ayahuasca teas that I collected from ceremonies conducted in Peru, Brazil, mainland United States, and even Hawaii itself. At the end of each ceremony, I respectfully approached the ayahuasca healer to ask if I might have a small sample of the tea that we had drunk the night before. And without exception, each healer gladly gave me a sample. I was surprised and saying, please, please do Western research on this amazing medicina. I was amazed to discover that despite the diversity of sources of plants, the healer's tradition, diversity in the country where the tea was made, there was remarkably similar dimethyltryptamine content across these teas. With the help of traditional healers, scientific colleagues, and students, we learned how to make a standardized, potent, organically grown ayahuasca tea. And in 2016, I submitted to the Food and Drug Administration an application asking them to give me permission to conduct human research in the United States. The FDA favorably reviewed the protocol, but requested more chemistry data before we could begin the trial. And so we've been working on that for the last 5 years. In 2018, Sunil Agrawal and I started Ames Institute partially in order to be able to provide psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy to our patients. And as you heard, in 2019, we began doing IRB-approved outcome studies with our patients to make sure that our results were objectively demonstrated. Then in 2018, I met Dr. Victoria Hale. Dr. Hale is a pharmaceutical chemist. She's a former FDA employee, and she's also founder of two very successful nonprofit pharmaceutical companies that are focused on global health. She's currently the chairwoman of MAP's board of directors. In 2020, Dr. Hale and I formed Sacred Medicines Public Benefit Corporation, which is a woman-owned psychedelic botanical drug company. The mission of our company is to bring safe, standardized, whole plant, polymolecular, complex psychedelic botanical medicines to scientists, clinicians, healers, and ultimately to patients. We at Sacred Medicines slowed down our work in the last 2 years in order to develop our reciprocity program that respects, honors, and acknowledges the indigenous traditional healers, the indigenous scientists, and the indigenous cultures that developed ayahuasca tea, and the full system of deep medical care many, many centuries, probably thousands of years ago. We at Sacred Medicines believe in the Nagoya Protocol. We agree in principle with the concept of requiring prior informed consent from the ancient inventors of ayahuasca in order to bring ayahuasca to North America and to the West. But which of the 102 Amazonian rainforest indigenous nations has the authority to provide such consent? Which tribal group gets to decide? Who should we ask? We at Sacred Medicines believe also in sharing access and benefit from the transfer of indigenous traditional medical knowledge to us in the West. We now better understand the resistance to the idea of medicalization of ayahuasca. We understand why we Westerners are not trusted. Why would indigenous cultures trust us? When our white patriarchal ancestors came to the Amazon basin more than 500 years ago, bringing disease, oppressive Christianity, and profit motive of capitalism, the death of indigenous culture, the death of communities, and ultimately, the death of nature that Western culture inevitably brings with it. Why would any indigenous group give us permission after what our culture has done to them? Ayahuasca is the most potent medicine I have ever encountered as a doctor. Many Westerners have now experienced the wonders by traveling to South America. There's a growing cadre of Western ayahuasca healers who've dedicated their entire lives to training under experienced shaman in South America. And currently in the United States, they work underground and they work at great personal risk. We envision a time when nature is decriminalized in the West, and these responsible, trained ayahuasca healers can do their healing work in safety. We in the West cannot pretend that we understand the unseen energies that are central to ayahuasca healing. Unlike the Amazonian rainforest shaman, we Westerners are not yet adept at transpersonal medicine. Years and years of dedicated training under the mentorship of an experienced healer is needed. We have so much to learn from grandmother ayahuasca and her healers. We at Sacred Medicines have come to understand that ayahuasca is a sacred tea and it's a sacred practice, and it cannot be imported into the US medical system. Ayahuasca cannot be commercialized. Ayahuasca should not be commercialized. We can learn from our South American elders. We can study the healing methods. We can engage in deep, meaningful conversations, and perhaps over time, build trust and collaboration. Sunil Agarwal and I started AIMS Institute in Seattle so that we would be ready to do ayahuasca human research. We have learned how to provide safe and effective ketamine-assisted psychotherapy to our patients with mental illness, chronic pain, cancer-related demoralization, and the existential despair that comes with a life-threatening illness. In the meantime, Dr. Hale and I and our Sacred Medicines teams of scientists and clinicians are dedicated to making psychedelic, sacred whole medicines for scientific brain research, clinical research, and for qualified healers. We are growing, protecting, and sustainably harvesting these sacred plants in Hawaii. We need help to grow and protect the plants. We need volunteers. We need research funds. And we are pleased and honored to be part of the awake.net and Lakshmi's marvelous platform where we can all come together in a single site in order to advance ethical, safe, psychedelic therapy for all who need it. Thank you.